As the full moon rose high in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the deserted park, John, a loner with schizophrenia, found himself drawn to its tranquility. John often sought solace in the park, away from the overwhelming sensory input of the city. He enjoyed the solitude and the calming effect that nature had on his restless mind. As John wandered deeper into the park, he began to hear faint whispers. He brushed them off as his usual auditory hallucinations, but the whispers grew louder and more distinct. He couldn't make out the words, but they sounded menacing and foreboding. Feeling a sudden sense of unease, John tried to ignore the voices and quicken his pace, but the whispers seemed to follow him. He looked around but saw no one else in the park. The trees cast long shadows, and the rustling of leaves in the breeze added to his growing paranoia. John's heart started to race as the whispers grew louder, echoing in his ears. He felt like he was being watched, but every time he turned around, there was no one there. His mind raced with fear, and he began to question his own reality. As John continued to walk, he stumbled upon an abandoned playground. The rusty swings creaked and swayed ominously in the wind, and the merry-go-round spun eerily on its own. He felt a chill run down his spine as he noticed a child's doll lying on the ground, its once bright colors now faded, and its glassy eyes staring blankly at him. Suddenly, the whispers grew into malicious laughter, echoing all around him. John clutched his ears, trying to block out the haunting voices, but they seemed to penetrate his very soul. He stumbled back, disoriented, and fell to the ground. That's when he saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching him. The figure was dressed in ragged clothes, and its face was obscured by darkness. John couldn't make out any features, but he could feel the malevolence emanating from it. Terrified, John tried to scramble to his feet and run, but his legs felt like jelly. The figure started to approach him slowly, its footsteps echoing loudly in the silent park. John's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, and he couldn't tell if what he was experiencing was real or just another hallucination. Desperate to escape, John stumbled through the park, trying to find a way out. But no matter how fast he ran, the figure was always right behind him, its laughter echoing in his ears. The park seemed to stretch on forever, and John's legs grew weaker with each step. Finally, exhausted and disoriented, John collapsed near a pond in the center of the park. He looked up and saw the figure standing at the edge of the water, its laughter now a sinister chant. The moon's reflection on the pond seemed to distort, and John felt like he was being pulled into a nightmarish dimension. With a last burst of adrenaline, John stumbled to his feet and ran towards the park's exit. As he reached the gates, he looked back and saw the figure disappear into thin air, leaving only an eerie silence behind. John stumbled out of the park, covered in sweat and panting heavily. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened, but he knew that he had narrowly escaped something truly terrifying. He vowed never to return to the park at night and sought help for his schizophrenia. In the following days, John couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, and the whispers still haunted him. He wondered if the figure he saw was a figment of his imagination or something more sinister. But one thing was for sure: he would never forget that fateful night in the park. John continued his therapy and medication for schizophrenia, and gradually, the whispers and hallucinations diminished. He tried to rationalize what had happened in the park, chalking it up to a particularly intense episode of his illness. However, a nagging feeling of unease persisted. Months passed, and John avoided the park at night, sticking to well-lit areas and crowded places. He focused on rebuilding his life, engaging in activities that brought him joy, and spending time with supportive friends and family. Yet, the memory of the figure in the park still haunted him, and he couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. One day, while browsing the local news, John stumbled upon an article that sent chills down his spine. It was about a notorious serial killer who had been active in the area several years ago. The killer had targeted lone individuals in deserted parks at night and was known for wearing ragged clothes and hiding in the shadows. The article included a composite sketch of the suspect, and to John's horror, it resembled the figure he had seen in the park. Dread washed over John as he realized that what he had experienced that fateful night might not have been a hallucination after all. It seemed that the killer had been stalking him, and he had narrowly escaped becoming another victim. Filled with a renewed sense of urgency, John contacted the police and shared his story. They took his account seriously and launched an investigation, but despite their efforts, the killer remained elusive, and no further incidents were reported. In time, John learned to manage his schizophrenia more effectively, but the experience in the park had left a lasting impact on him. He became an advocate for mental health awareness, sharing his story to help others understand the challenges of living with schizophrenia and the importance of seeking help. Years passed, and John gradually moved on with his life, but he could never forget that terrifying night in the park. He still avoided going to parks at night, and occasionally, he would catch himself looking over his shoulder, feeling a familiar sense of unease. The memory of the figure in the park remained a mystery, a reminder of the thin line between reality and delusion, and a reminder to always be vigilant. In the end, John found solace in the support of his loved ones and his commitment to managing his mental health. He continued to live a fulfilling life, but the park at night remained a place he would never forget, a place where he had come face to face with the depths of his own fears and the blurred boundaries of his mind. And as he looked back on his journey, he realized that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that happen within ourselves. With that realization, he found peace and closure, knowing that he had overcome a nightmarish experience and had emerged stronger on the other side. The park at night would always hold a dark secret for him, but it had also taught him resilience and the importance of self-care, and for that, he was grateful. The end.